Well, hey guys, it is 7:30, and so looks like we're going to get started here. Um, Everything's set up and everything seems to be running pretty good for our review tonight for time period 5. The only thing that is not working for me on my end is my chat. And I don't know why the chat box is not working. So what I'm doing is I got my phone set up and I'll use my phone so if I can try to monitor the chat that way. So, just trying to make sure everything's good and ready to roll while some people are joining in. We got 16 people here already. So, all right. So this is the plan. I am going to monitor my chat on my phone the best that I can. So if you have any questions, you can post them there. I don't have this bugs me though because I don't have access to what I really need to do. So I'm just going to try one more thing here and see if this is going to work for what I want. Maybe this will do it. Nope. Chat's still not coming up. All right. I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to go ahead and get started. So here we go. We are going into time period 5. And when we talk about time period 5, let me go back a screen here. We're looking at the effects of land acquisitions in the United States. Essentially, everything I think that we see in time period 5 is an effect of the growth of our nation. The more we grow, the more we expand, the more different ideologies start to come out and start to conflict with one another. So when we were just a nation of 13 states, it was much easier. I have no idea what I just hit here. It was much easier for us to manage everything. But as we start to grow, like I said, new ideologies, new perspectives, new goals, they all start coming out. And so what we're going to see happening is we're going to see the growth of sectional tensions in our country, which is going to eventually lead to the Civil War. And then also, once we come through the Civil War, what are we going to do with our country from that point on? So these are all the things we're going to be talking about today. It's a pretty straightforward. I don't know what I just did. I just lost my stream. Uh-oh. Doggone, what happened? I'm back. I don't know what happened. I don't know what I hit, but all of a sudden everything just went black here. So I apologize, guys. Hopefully you stuck with me. It looks like some people are still here. And coming back, I now have the chat window. So if you can hear me okay, just go ahead and type something in the chat window. Just say hello or goodbye. I can't stand to watch this anymore. But I'm going to go ahead and try this all over again and see what happens. So, I clicked a button, so let's see. We're going to go right back to this presentation where I was starting. Pull this up here. That should be it. Let me make this bigger. All right, here we go. So this is where we were starting. This was, the original intent of what we were going to be doing. And I just screwed it up again. Let me bring this over here. I really did have all this planned out for you this evening. It was working really good. There we go. Okay, so what we were talking about is what was going on in our country, essentially leading up to the Civil War. And the bottom line was a lot of growth was leading to a lot of conflict. So before this gets completely out of hand, which it's getting out of hand here, we're going to go ahead and get started on this. So I don't know. Oh my goodness. I'm trying to open 3 different windows here and none of them are working for me. Okay, we're just going to do this here. So big idea number 1. So this is where we're going to start. We're going to start with the idea that many Americans believed that it was their manifest destiny to expand their nation over the whole North American continent. Now, when we talk about manifest destiny, this is a word we throw around quite a bit. And essentially what it means is it's this ideology that advocated for this idea throughout North America that the American culture had this perceived superiority and that we would be able to spread this culture and our religion and our technology and our politics across the entire continent. We believed that we had a God-given right to possess the land from the Atlantic all the way to the Pacific Ocean. That was manifest destiny. And it wasn't just about possessing the land, though. It was about expanding our culture across the entire continent. Now, there were some valuable assets, or there were some benefits to manifest destiny. I mean, number 1, we're opening ourselves up to a lot more natural resources and mineral resources that's going to help boost our economy. That in turn is going to give a lot more economic opportunities for American citizens. So, there's a lot of benefit for the United States. The more we expanded, the more economic growth was available for not only our country, but also our citizens as well. It's also going to provide a religious refuge for some people as they move west. They're trying to escape some religious persecution that's happening within different parts of our country. So that's going to be made available to us as well. So keep that in mind, that as we move forward over these next few big ideas, this idea of manifest destiny is driving everything, but everything that happens has an effect. And so what we're going to start looking at is, as we expand westward, what effect is that going to have on our nation as a whole? So let's go to big idea number 2, and you're going to start seeing those effects come to life right away. Big idea number 2, the Mexican-American War was caused by the annexation of Texas, and it resulted in large territorial gains for the United States. Just lost my light. It's just not my night. All right. So anyway, in the 1820s, Mexico is going to take control of the New Spain in North America. And as they do that, they're going to start inviting Americans into the Mexican territory. They want to populate the Mexican territory and in order for them to hold on to it. But what's going to happen is, as Americans start moving into Mexico, they're going to start bringing their own ideas and their own beliefs and their own practices with them. For example, religion. Most Americans who move into Mexico are going to maintain their Protestant faith. They're also going to bring their slaves with them. And that's going to start causing a lot of tensions between them and the Mexican government. By the 1830s, a lot of Americans have moved into what we consider the modern day region of Texas. And these are mostly Southern Americans, and they're moving in there to take advantage of the agricultural benefits and the soil, and they want to grow cotton. And so they're going to be moving in with their slaves and still practicing their religion. So the Mexican government is then going to start mandating the conversion to Catholicism of anyone coming into their nation. They're also going to abolish slavery. Well, both of these actions completely conflict with most Americans who are moving into the territory, and that's going to cause tension. That tension is going to boil over in 1835 when the Texans revolt against the Mexican government. Texas Revolution is going to get started. The Texans are going to end up winning when Santa Anna, the dictator leader of Mexico, is going to sign a treaty. That treaty, according to the Texans, recognized the southern border of Texas as being the Rio Grande River. Now, the Mexican government is not going to recognize that treaty as the Texans are reporting what it says. They said that there's no way that Santa Anna ever would agree to the Rio being the southern border. In fact, they said the southern border is the Nueces River. So, conflict already with this new, Texas independence. Well, the goal, my mic is going in and out. Okay. Sorry. Yeah, some people said it's okay. So hopefully, Michael, you can get it. It's on your end and not on my end. I'm sorry. I'll just keep an eye on it. I'm still showing a really strong signal. So if that drops, I'll let you guys know. So Texas, when they first gained their independence, their goal was to come into the United States. But now they have this conflict over the border. And not only that, as a slave state coming into the United States, that's going to cause conflict in our country because we're trying to maintain a balance between the free and the slave states. So Texas is not going to come in right away. But it's still looming out there. And I think there is still an intention to bring Texas in. Just the timing has to be right for it to work. Another area that's starting to grow up at this point as far as American influence is the Oregon Territory. Now, if you remember correctly, during Monroe's presidency, John Quincy Adams had gone with Britain and negotiated sharing the Oregon Territory. Well, with the growth of Manifest Destiny, more and more people are headed west. They're going out on that Oregon Trail, headed to the Willamette Valley, where you're going to find a lot of fertile soil. So you have a lot of farmers, a lot of missionaries moving out into the Oregon Territory. And what's going to happen is, as the number of Americans grow in that territory, the demand for that territory to become American is going to start to grow as well. Now, we don't really run into a direct conflict with Great Britain over this, but when we go to the election of 1844, Manifest Destiny, Oregon, Texas, and quite honestly, Mexico are all going to become center stage for this election. James K. Polk, the Democrat, is going to run on the main idea that he is going to complete Manifest Destiny. He is going to complete this expansion of the United States all the way from the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean. And he runs on this promise and he says, I'm just going to do it in one term. So elect me and I'm going to get it done. The Americans elect him, he gets it done. But before he takes off as John Tyler, the sitting president, the lame duck president at the time, is going to go ahead and annex Texas into the Union. So technically, Polk is not responsible for Texas coming into the Union directly, but I think him promising that he was going to get it done inspired Tyler and the rest of the government to do it before Polk could get in, so at least they could get credit for accomplishing something during Tyler's presidency. So Polk comes into office. Texas is now part of the Union. He is initially going to negotiate with Great Britain, and he is going to come to a compromise with Great Britain where we are going to split the territory. So the existing northern border of the United States at this point is just going to extend across Oregon, essentially splitting that territory in half. And so now we have both Texas and we have the Oregon Territory in play. That's 2 for 2 as far as Polk is concerned. But he also promised California, and California is part of Mexico. So we want to get the northern lands from Mexico in order to complete our, quote, Manifest Destiny. Now, initially, Polk is going to offer like $15 million to purchase the land from Mexico, and Mexico says no. As a result, and you can say it's a result of them turning down our offer, or it just happened to happen this way, we are going to end up going to war with Mexico. It's the Mexican-American War, and the dispute is over the border of Texas. When we annexed Texas in, when Tyler annexed Texas in, we came in with the understanding that the Rio Grande is the southern border. Mexico is still holding on to this idea that no, it is the Nueces River, which is north of the Rio. And so this is going to lead to President Polk sending Zachary Taylor down to Texas in order to, quote, guard the border, to protect the American border at the Rio Grande. Well, he is going to run into Mexican troops doing the exact same thing for their country, and conflict is going to ensue. About 11 Americans are going to be killed. This is going to lead to the demand and the declaration of war with Mexico. Now, interestingly, I'll just throw this out. In the debates about declaring war in the Congress, a young congressman from Illinois is going to step up and demand that we get proof that American blood was spilled on American land. His resolution is known as the spot resolution because he said, I want to know the spot that American blood was spilled, and I want to make sure it was spilled in America and not in Mexico. That young congressman was Abraham Lincoln. Now, he's not going to get his resolution, but Polk is going to get his declaration of war. And the United States is going to win this war quite easily. And we're going to take all the territory that Mexico holds, and we're also going to take Mexico City. This is going to result in the negotiation of the, quote, best treaty in the world, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And after this victory, in this treaty, Mexico is going to agree to sell the lands that we initially had asked for when Polk sent Slidell, his Secretary of State, down to Mexico to negotiate. They're going to sell those lands to us, and we're going to get all of the lands that make up the present-day United States, all the way to, from Texas all the way west to California. We're going to end up paying like $10 million to Mexico for this land. Now, during this war, we realized that there were going to be questions about expansion and how we would handle the lands that we gained from Mexico. So while we're still fighting the war, David Wilmot is going to introduce what's known as the Wilmot Proviso. And what the Wilmot Proviso said is, in the event that we, quote, win this war, any lands that we get from Mexico, we're going to designate right now that they will be non-slave holding lands. We're going to kind of try to nip it in the bud. We're going to stop the debate before it even starts. And he's going to try to get this passed prior to the war coming to an end. The proviso is going to fail, but what it shows us is we're starting to see the growing tension over slavery in our country. We can go back to the Compromise of 1820, the Missouri Compromise, and we thought we had it all settled at that point, but we really didn't. Thomas Jefferson, remember, he said, you're holding the wolf by the ear. We got to settle this now. And we're like, nah, we got this. Missouri Compromise, 3630 line, that's all we need going forward. We'll be just fine. Well, we know now that that's just not what happened. Not only that, 1848, as the war is being fought, in California, gold is going to be discovered, and thousands of Americans are going to start making their way out to California to make it rich really quick. I mean, in 1848, the population of Americans in California was 14,000. By 1860, we're up to 60,000. So all of this is driving expansion in our country, and the debate is now going to start to grow. How do we settle these lands going forward? How do we deal with the, quote, slavery question? All right, that's going to take us to big idea number 3. Big idea number 3 says this: further acquisition of land led to an increasingly bitter debate over the future of slavery in America, which was temporarily resolved in the Compromise of 1850. So here we are with all this new land west of Texas. So you just picture the Louisiana Purchase went right up to the Rockies. Now we have the Rocky Mountains all the way over to California. How are we going to settle that land? Who's going to govern it? How's it going to be governed? And more importantly, what kind of labor are we going to have in those lands? During this time, you're going to see several groups rising up to make their claim for what they think is best for the Mexican ceded land. Now remember, we already have the Missouri Compromise in place, and that was created to govern the Louisiana Territory, which at this point was called the Missouri Territory. There was never any conditions in case America grew. So they set up the 3630 line. And when we got the land from Mexico, there were some people that said, well, just extend that line west. Take the 3630 line, go all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Well, a lot of people didn't agree with that. There were a lot of people who said, we want to stop the expansion of slavery. Where slavery exists right now is fine. But what we really want to do is save all that land that we got from Mexico for white farmers. That's who should get that land because they're the ones who could probably make the most of it. So the free soilers, as they were called, are going to start pushing for the stopping for no slavery in the new territories and just keeping slavery where it's at. Then you also have Northern Democrats and Whigs, who basically what they wanted to do is they also wanted to keep the land free in the West, but not for free African Americans or not for Southern Americans, but again, for free white Americans. And then you had the abolitionists who say, get rid of all the slavery. Why are we even having this debate? So all of this is going on and no one's getting what they wanted. And that's when the Compromise of 1850 is going to come up. This is Stephen Douglas was the main author of the Compromise of 1850, but we also give Henry Clay credit for this compromise because, let's face it, he is the great compromiser. And 5 conditions are going to be created under the Compromise of 1850. Number 1, California. California is going to come in as a free state. Second, when we look at all that land in the Mexican ceded territories, so the territories of New Mexico and Arizona, those lands are going to be set aside, and the people who live there will be able to determine whether or not they want slavery. We call it popular sovereignty. The people will vote to determine what they will have in their own territory. The third key part of the compromise is going to be the slave trade is going to be brought to an end in Washington, D.C. That's just not good optics when all these foreign dignitaries come in and we're actually having slave auctions in the capital of the United States. So the slave trade, the buying and the selling of slaves, is going to come to an end in our nation's capital, in Washington, D.C. Another key part or another part of the Compromise of 1850 is going to be the settlement of Texas debts. When Texas came in as a state, they had a lot of debt from their time as a republic. They initially said, we're going to pay it off ourselves. Don't worry, United States, we got this. They didn't get it. They didn't have it. So they're going to turn over a lot of state lands to the federal government in exchange for us paying off their debt. The final part of the Compromise of 1850, and absolutely the most controversial part of the Compromise of 1850, is a stronger Fugitive Slave Act. We already had laws regarding fugitive slaves in our country. By fugitive slaves, we mean runaway slaves. Well, the South felt like they weren't getting the backing of the federal government when it came to dealing with their escaped or runaway slaves. So as part of this compromise, the United States is going to strengthen that law and essentially give federal backing to the return of slaves to the South if they escape and are caught. This is the most controversial part, as I said, of the compromise because it caused a lot more problems. You see, in the North, Most people weren't opposed to slavery. They were fine where it was, that it existed. All they wanted to know was that slavery would not spread. Keep it where it is. And what's going to happen is this stronger fugitive slave law is going to increase the responsibility of all Americans to report runaway and escaped slaves. And not only that, so the Northerners are upset that now they've kind of been pulled into this slavery debate when they really didn't want to be part of it. The abolitionists in the North are ticked. They're just like, are you kidding me? You know, they're doing their best to bring slavery to an end, and now the federal government is supporting actions to return escaped slaves back to the South. So the Compromise of 1850, it's going to be the last compromise with regards to the expansion of slavery, but it causes more problems than what we had beforehand, because it's going to create a rising tension over slavery. One of the I'm not going to say this is the effect of the Compromise of 1850, but one thing that's been in place for a while now, since the early 1800s, is the Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad was a system of trails and safe houses that was set up throughout the North leading up into Canada to help runaway slaves. The new fugitive slave law is going to make it that much harder. And if Northerners were not aware of that, a book is going to come out in 1852 called Uncle Tom's Cabin. And Uncle Tom's Cabin is centered around the story of a woman and her family trying to escape slavery in the South using the trails and the paths of the Underground Railroad, all the while being chased by slave catchers throughout the North as they try to make it to Canada. What Uncle Tom's Cabin is going to do is open the eyes of Americans to the reality of slavery. That's essentially what it's going to do. As long as slavery, before this book, as long as slavery existed in the South, it stayed in the South, it was the South's problem. We don't have to worry about it because it's down there. Uncle Tom's Cabin gave it personality. It gave it life. It made slavery more of a human condition than just an economic condition in the South. And so, excuse me, we're going to see that this is going to start to change everything. Okay? So, here we go. We move on to the next big idea. Big idea number 4. Tension over slavery increased because of conflicting regional labor ideologies, a fervent abolition movement in the North, and the arguments of Southerners regarding the constitutionality of slavery. So I'm hoping what you see is, as we start going through all of this, you're seeing one thing happen that leads to another, that leads to another, that leads to another. This is all cause and effect, and that's what this unit is really all about, cause and effect. So when we get to big idea number 4, after Uncle Tom's Cabin, you're going to see, or not just after Uncle Tom's Cabin, but after the Mexican-American War, after the Compromise of 1850, we're going to start seeing more and more Americans start moving west. And what you're also seeing is more and more people want to take their slaves with them. And this is going to become an issue in the Kansas Territory. Now, Stephen Douglas, the same guy who helped write the Compromise of 1850, well, he's trying to, buddy up to all his voters, and he's trying to help get them behind him, and he wants to build a transcontinental railroad. And he needs it to go across Kansas because he wants it to leave from Chicago, his home state of Illinois, go through Kansas and take a northern route. But to get support for that northern route of the Transcontinental Railroad, he needs Southern congressmen to back him up. Well, the congressmen from the South, they want the railroad to go along the southern route. So what can Douglas do to help get them to support a northern route of the Transcontinental Railroad? The simple solution is find more territory for slavery to expand to. And so he's going to start looking at the Kansas Territory, and he is going to write and legislate, not get passed, but he is going to lobby for the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1850. The Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, is going to be passed and signed into law by Franklin Pierce. And Pierce is going to sign this into law. And what the Kansas-Nebraska Act did was, where that territory previously had been governed by the Missouri Compromise, and it was, since Kansas was north of the 3630 line, it was not going to allow slavery. What the new act did, though, was it changed, or it repealed, the Missouri Compromise and said now popular sovereignty would determine whether or not Kansas would be a slave state or a non-slave state. So what you essentially did was repealed the Missouri Compromise and opened Kansas up to the possibility of being another slave state. It's going to be determined by all the settlers who move there. Well, what you're going to see happening as a result of that is both pro-slavery and anti-slavery people are going to start flooding to Kansas to basically cook the books on the vote. The more people we get on our side into Kansas, the more people who will vote for what we want. And these two sides are going to come together and start clashing right away. And the tension is going to rise in Kansas to where it's no longer a political debate. It's going to become a physical fight. And we're going to go into what's known as Bleeding Kansas. Kansas becomes a preview of what the Civil War will be. It's going to be the pro-slavery forces fighting against the anti-slavery forces for who would control the state of Kansas. And this is going to be yet another warning sign of what's to come. Shortly after that, 1857, a major Supreme Court case is going to be heard. It's called the Dred Scott case. Dred Scott was a slave who believed that since he lived in a free territory of Illinois, he should be free, and he's going to sue for his freedom. He's going to go in front of the Supreme Court, and the court is going to rule against Dred Scott. First of all, they're going to say, number one, slaves are not citizens, and therefore you have no standing in the federal court. But then the court is going to go one step further, and they're going to say, furthermore, slaves are property. And as property, they cannot be regulated by the federal government. The federal government is supposed to protect property, not regulate what you can do with it. And so what the Dred Scott decision did was not only declare that slaves were property, it ruled that the Missouri Compromise was unconstitutional. So we're seeing major changes happening in our country. This is going to tick off a lot of people. As a result of this, you're going to see the abolitionists and the abolitionist movement really start to kick in. And one of the biggest abolitionists of the time is John Brown. John Brown is going to make his name during Bleeding Kansas at the Potawatomi Massacre, where he and his sons physically attack with broadswords 5 pro-slavery advocates, and they're going to kill them right there on the spot. But that's not all that's going to happen, so we're going to just keep moving forward. Big idea number 5. All attempts to compromise over slavery are going to ultimately fail, which is going to lead to the rise of sectional political parties. Couple things are going to happen right after Dred Scott. First and foremost, you're going to see in Illinois, the Senate election is going to step up, and Stephen Douglas is running for senator against Abraham Lincoln. And they're going to do a series of debates. They're known as the Lincoln-Douglas debates, and they are debating the merits of the Dred Scott decision, whether or not it was right or wrong. Now, Lincoln was arguing that the Dred Scott decision was completely out of play because he said, you're fooling yourselves if you think that slaves are just property. It's during the Lincoln-Douglas debates that Lincoln is going to give his very famous House Divided speech, where he said, we either have to be all slave or all free, but this House Divided is never going to be able to stand. At the same time, while these debates are going to go on, you're going to start seeing those factions that I talked about earlier, the Free Soilers, the Northern Democrats, the Whigs, the abolitionists. They are going to come together and they are going to form the Republican Party. Now, the platform of the Republican Party, formed in about 1854, is going to be to stop the spread of slavery. They're essentially adopting the Free Soiler platform, keep slavery where it exists. Now, the abolitionists, they're not happy with that platform, but that platform's a lot closer to what they want than what the Democrats want, because the Democrats are looking to spread slavery. They're looking not only to spread slavery, they're also looking to expand the United States further. The Ostend Manifesto is something that's part of the Democratic platform, to move our country into Cuba and make Cuba another slave-owning state. So the Free Soilers are going to join together with these other factions, and we're going to have a new political party called the Republican Party. Lincoln is going to become the primary candidate later for the Republican Party. The Lincoln-Douglas debates vault him to the national stage. It gets him national recognition. And so that's going to lead us to big idea number 6, which says the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860 without a single electoral vote from the South led to the secession of the Southern states. So we're going to get to the election of 1860. We've come through this really tense period of the 1850s. None of the presidents that existed there, from Millard Fillmore to Franklin Pierce to James Buchanan, none of them had an answer to any of the tension that was rising in our country. Lincoln's going to run in a contested election. We're going to have 4 separate candidates running in this election. You're going to have the Republican candidate Lincoln, the Northern Democratic Party Stephen Douglas, the Southern Democratic Party John Breckinridge, and the Constitutional Union Party John Bell. All of these guys are running for president, and you can always, with 4 guys running, the vote is going to be completely split. Not only that, the Southern Democrats aren't going to cast a single vote for any of the Republicans, but Lincoln is going to win the election of 1860, like I said, without a single electoral vote from the South. Now, even though Lincoln explicitly said during his campaign that he didn't want to end slavery, he just wanted to stop the spread of slavery, he and the Republicans were seen as a threat to the Southern way of life. And they believed in the South that this was another step towards completely ending their way of life as they knew it. Not just slavery, but everything that they knew. And so when he wins, the South sees in their little crystal ball the future of slavery in our country, and they're like, we're out of here. South Carolina is going to be the first state to secede, and South Carolina is going to be followed by Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, and Louisiana. And so these states secede from the Union. They will later be followed by Virginia, North Carolina, Mississippi, and Kentucky. So the South is seceding, and we're moving towards war. The war is going to start when the very first shots were fired at Fort Sumter in South Carolina. That's going to be the start of the Civil War. Now, there are border states that Lincoln is very concerned about. He's already lost all these states in the South. His goal throughout this whole thing is to keep the Union together. But the border states, he says, I got to hold on to the border states. These border states, Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and I said Kentucky went with the Confederacy. I meant Tennessee. So Missouri, Delaware, Kentucky, and Maryland. Those are our border states. Lincoln is going to fight to keep the border states in. Now, keep in mind, these border states are slave states. Throughout the entire Civil War, the border states are going to be allowed to keep their slaves. There was never any attempt to remove slavery from those states, because Lincoln realized if I remove slavery from the border states, I lose the border states, and he couldn't afford to do it. He needed the manpower from the people who lived there. He needed the I guess the buffer, like a staging area to start to move into the Confederacy. He couldn't lose Maryland, because if he lost Maryland, that meant the U.S. capital, Washington, D.C., is already going to be in Confederate territory. So you got to understand that the importance of the border states in this war to Lincoln and to everybody else. Okay? So now we're going into war. Everything that we've gone all the way back to Manifest Destiny, to the Mexican War, to the Treaty of Guadalupe and Hidalgo, and all this new land that we got, all of this has led to expansion, building up the debate about slavery and other issues, leading us to this moment where we are now at war. And big idea number 7. Even though the North and the South mobilized their entire economy and society to fight the Civil War, the Union ultimately won because of advantages in population, industry, the leadership of Lincoln, and the successful strategy of cutting off the South from outside aid. Now, I'm not going to get into a lot of the strategies and stuff like that, but what you do need to know is that going into this war, the North on paper absolutely had the advantage. They had the people, they had the factories, they had, the money, everything. But what they didn't have that the South had. The South was fighting for a cause. The South only had to fight a defensive war, so they had to prevent the North from invading. And the South had better generals. Those things initially helped the South in the beginning. Now, the South's plan was to use their economic strength, cotton, to lure foreign countries to come in and help them fight, specifically Britain and France. They thought these countries are reliant on our cotton, so we're going to use King Cotton or cotton diplomacy to keep these countries involved and help us win this war. That ain't going to happen. That plan pretty much fails. So then we start looking at the advantages the North have, and we're going to see those advantages start to overcome the South very quickly. So the North, like I said, they had a larger navy, or larger population. They had a navy. They had economics. They had banks. They had manufacturing. And they had a well-established central government. The one thing the South did wrong was they set up a confederation, very similar to what the United States set up in its early days when we had the Articles of Confederation. And we know how that worked out. The South is going to deal with the same problem, states versus central government. And their central government is not strong enough to hold them all together. One of the major battles that you need to know, or there's several, the first one is Antietam. Antietam was fought in 1862, and it was effectually fought to a draw. But what Antietam did, though, because of that battle, because of the extreme loss of life, it was the bloodiest day in Civil War history. It kept England and other foreign countries out of the war. They wanted nothing to do with getting involved in the war. So we now know that there's not going to be any foreign allies coming in and helping either side. It was just the Union versus the Confederacy. The non-loss, I guess I would say, of Antietam is also going to give Lincoln the political power to issue the Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation technically freed all the slaves in the rebelling states. So all the slaves that lived in the Confederacy would be free based on the Emancipation Proclamation. This executive order, though, had little effect very early because the Confederacy was a separate country and legislation from the United States didn't include the Confederacy. But what the Emancipation Proclamation did for the Union was it gave the Union a purpose for fighting the war. It gave them a purpose to fight to not only free the slaves, but to preserve our Union and keep our country going forward. And because of that, like I said, England, France, other countries are going to stay completely out of it. Other key battles, the Battle of Vicksburg. The Battle of Vicksburg is going to be a Union victory along the Mississippi River. Once we gained control of the Mississippi River, we essentially cut the Confederacy in half, making it much easier to manage militarily. And then the Battle of Gettysburg. Gettysburg was the bloodiest battle in the war. And Gettysburg is going to have a massive death toll for both sides. But what it did was the Union victory at Gettysburg stopped the Confederate push northward. Even though the Confederacy only had to fight a defensive war, their commander, Robert E. Lee, saw the value of a strong victory in the north that might have honestly propelled them to a victory. But he lost at Gettysburg, and he is in retreat the rest of the war. Following the Battle of Gettysburg, several months later, Lincoln is going to give his famous Gettysburg Address, where he starts off 7 years ago, referencing the Declaration of Independence and the founding values that our country were built on. And he's going to talk about how all men are created equal and that governments by the people and for the people cannot fail. He is giving a goal to the Union of what we're fighting for. We can't let our government fail. We have to start fighting for equality. This is the influence, or this is the inspiration that the Union needed to go forward. The next year, believe it or not, is an election year. Lincoln's going to be running against McClellan in the election of 1864, which is just mind-boggling that he holds the election in the middle of this war, but he does. And one of his generals, General William Tecumseh Sherman, is going to promise him, I am going to help you win this election. And we're going to see in 1864 the Union go on this extreme offensive in Sherman's March to the Sea. Sherman's March to the Sea is essentially Sherman taking Union troops and using this idea of scorched earth or total war to march through specifically Georgia and destroy everything in their path. Anything the Confederacy would be able to use to fight, they destroyed it. They tore up railroad tracks. They tore all the infrastructure. They tore that up. They burned houses. They burned farms. They salted fields. Anything that would help the Confederacy, Sherman made sure to destroy it. And he's going to make his way to the ocean, to Savannah, Georgia, and then he's going to start working his way north. So you have the Confederacy in retreat. You have the Union essentially sandwiching them from the north and the south, which is going to lead to Robert E. Lee's surrender to General Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse in April of 1865. At the surrender, like I said, Lee surrenders to Grant. The war comes to an end. But now, what's next? We got to rebuild this country. Great, the Union won the war, but the southern states are in ruin. And what are we going to do with over 4.5 million slaves who now are suddenly free? So that's going to take us to big idea number 8. Big idea number 8 says that after the Civil War, America entered a period of Reconstruction, which abolished slavery, amended the Constitution, and amended the Constitution significantly, and sought to reunify the North and the South. Now, we just talked about this in our class the last couple days, but just to recap, we had several plans that were introduced for how we were going to reconstruct the South. The first one was Lincoln's plan, the 10% plan, where he said at least 10% of the population that was able to vote in the 1860 election had to swear an oath of allegiance to the U.S. Constitution. And as soon as each state did that and ratified the 13th Amendment abolished slavery in our country, then they would be allowed back into the Union. Lincoln's plan was very lenient, but what he had said in his second inaugural address was, even though all this blood had been spilled, even though we were in great pain, we had to move forward with malice towards none and charity towards all. He was asking the country to be forgiving, to give grace, and to help rebuild this country. And his plan was set up to do that. Well, his plan, though, unfortunately, is going to come to an end when he's going to be assassinated by John Wilkes Booth a couple days or several days after the war ends. This is going to bring Vice President Andrew Johnson into the presidency. And Andrew Johnson's going to introduce his own plan, similar to Lincoln's, but with some significantly personal gains on his part. He's going to have tension between him and the Republican-controlled Congress. They want nothing to do with his plan. They go through a series of they pass something, he vetoes it, they override his veto. They pass something, he vetoes it, they override his veto. And this is the relationship they have with him. The Congress is being led by the radical Republicans. The radical Republicans were a wing of the Republican Party that wanted to extend civil rights to blacks as well as establish political and economic punishments for the South. We talked about that saying, the waving of the bloody shirt. They want the South to pay. They want the South to be punished. So yes, they are going to be pushing for civil rights for blacks. That's absolutely true. But at the expense of the South. Moderates, there are moderate Republicans in Congress. They are also looking to the South, and they're seeing the propensity for economic gains in the South for white Americans. So that's the other thing that's going to be fought for during this time. I don't want to lose my place here. Okay. So one of the things that's going to happen during this time is we're going to see the Civil Rights Act of 1866 passed. My dog is right here. The Civil Rights Act is essentially going to say that all blacks are citizens of the United States. It overturned Dred Scott, and Johnson tried to veto it, and it was overridden. This is going to lead to the passage or the ratification of the 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment basically said all persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens, and no state shall deprive anybody of citizenship based on their race or previous condition of servitude. So the Civil Rights Act tried to make blacks citizens of the United States legislatively. But with the presidential veto, even though Congress overrode it, they realized that they needed an amendment to the Constitution to guarantee citizenship for the freedmen. And that's what the 14th Amendment did. Later, they're also going to ratify the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment is going to protect voting rights of the freedmen. Just the freedmen, not women. That's one group that is still being left behind in all of that, the women of the United States. Even though they had been fighting for abolition as well as black civil rights since the middle part of the Civil War, they've been left behind. The radical Republicans are going to institute their own Reconstruction plan, and they're going to pass the Reconstruction Acts that are going to divide the southern states into 5 military districts and put those districts under martial law. Their requirements for states to return to the Union is every state has to ratify the 13th, 14th, and then later the 15th Amendment and allow for universal male suffrage in their states. In the meantime, Andrew Johnson's still conflicting with the Republicans in Congress, and they come up with a plan to get rid of him. They're going to pass the Tenure of Office Act. The Tenure of Office Act essentially says that a president cannot fire any appointed official in his cabinet without congressional approval. The argument behind that is, well, you needed congressional approval to get the guy in office, so you're going to need congressional approval to get him out of office. Well, they knew that Johnson was getting ready to fire Secretary of War Edward Stanton. So he fires him. They bring him up on charges for violating the law. He's going to be, the House is going to impeach him. He's going to be put on trial in the Senate. Andrew Johnson becomes the first president in U.S. history to be impeached. He wins his case by 1 vote. So they don't get him out of office, but they tried. So that's going on kind of in the background while all this other stuff is going on with the Reconstruction Acts. Meanwhile, down in the South, The new freedmen are trying to find their way in Southern society. It's a very difficult process. And if you can imagine, all of a sudden, all these people were slaves, and now they're supposed to be treated as equal and seen as equal. And it's hard to put a law on paper and make that change the heart of man. So you're seeing you're seeing some progress because the Freedmen's Bureau is going to be created to help the transition from slavery to freedom for a lot of these black people. And you're going to see free blacks are going to set up schools for their kids. You're going to see the rise of black colleges during this time period in the South. Some because of the voting legislation, because of the 15th Amendment, you're going to see black men being voted into Congress and being elected into Congress. But just because there was progress doesn't mean that oppression went away. You're going to see the use of sharecropping as a method to keep slaves in economic slavery, because sharecropping was essentially an economic system of tenant farming, that you rented land from a landowner and with the goal of paying him back once the crops came in. But you got caught under this burden of heavy loans, and so you could never get out. You could never get the freedom from your sharecrop, and so you were essentially still a slave, but now it's a slave who owes money to the landowner. You're going to see the rise of organizations such as white leagues and the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, white supremacy groups that are, organized to terrorize blacks in the South and make an effort to prevent their civil rights, being able to practice their civil rights, including voting. And then black codes. Black codes are going to be created, and the black codes were laws throughout southern states that were set up to undermine the Reconstruction efforts and relegate African Americans back to second-class citizen status. So all of this is going on, and some of those black codes, when we talk about those, just a few examples. Blacks couldn't testify in court. They couldn't buy land. They had to turn in paperwork to prove that they weren't vagrants every year. This is where I work. This is where I live. No one else had to do that, but they had to do that. So these black codes were put in place to try to undermine the civil rights that the government was giving to blacks, yet they weren't happy about that in the South, okay? So there's big idea number 8. Let's move on to big idea number 9, our last big idea of the evening. Come on, computer. Here we go. Big idea number 9. Reconstruction. Oh, hey, Brian. How you doing, Ryan? Reconstruction ultimately failed because of Northern weariness of forcing Southerners into submission and Southern insistence on maintaining their pre-Civil War society. So this leads us to the election of 1877, and that's what we've been talking about the last couple days in class, so I don't need to go too in-depth in here, but essentially what's going to happen is the panic of 1873, first of all, is going to hit. I didn't really talk about that, but an economic panic is going to hit our country, and that's going to have devastating effects, not just in the South, but in the North as well. So the entire country is feeling the weight of an economic panic, bankruptcies, unemployment, businesses going under, and all that's happening. And people in the North are quite honestly getting tired of all this money being sent down to help rebuild the South. They're like, where is our support? Where is our help? And so that leads us to the election of 1877, where you have Rutherford B. Hayes running against Samuel Tilden. Hayes was the Republican, Tilden was the Democrat. And it's a disputed election because you have 3 states, believe it or not, Louisiana, South Carolina, and Florida, that both claim, or that have Republicans and Democrats that both claim that their candidate won that state. So we have 3 states in question regarding the Electoral College. And what's going to end up happening is a compromise is going to be made called the Compromise of 1877. And in that compromise, the Republicans are going to agree to remove the military out of the southern states. They're going to agree to start giving Southerners jobs in the federal government. And Hayes is also going to agree to appoint a Southern Democrat to his cabinet. Well, essentially what happens with the election of Rutherford B. Hayes in 1877, Reconstruction officially comes to an end. The problem we're going to see going forward is that though Reconstruction came to an end, Reconstruction did not solve all the problems that still existed, not only in the southern states, but also to a point in the northern states as well. And we're going to see this, you're going to see an anti-African American movements continue in the South, but that's going to roll over into anti-immigrant movements in the North. And what we really have is a mess that maybe if we had just stuck with Reconstruction, even though it was hard, even though it was painful, and even though it caused a disputed election, if we had just stuck with it, maybe those problems wouldn't have been as big as they were or lasted as long as they have. And that is the end of this unit. Wow, got through that pretty quick. I do have my chat window popped up in the middle of that, which is kind of good. So we do have, if you guys have any questions, I am happy to answer any of those questions you have right now. It's a lot of information, but let's see. You graduated from A&M this past August. That is awesome, Ryan. Good for you. Ryan's a former student of mine. He was one of, when I first started doing these live reviews, he would always hop on and was, I guess, one of the OGs to my live reviews. So, Ryan, I'm so proud of you. That's awesome. I'm sure you are doing great things right now. So I appreciate you checking in. So anyway, I love it when old students check in. See, when my students right now, when you're up and graduated from A&M or Texas or wherever you go, I love it when you hop on and let me know how things are going. So, all right, so let me get back to this review because you guys are like, all right, Lennox, let's go. So here's the deal, guys. As you're preparing for this test tomorrow, focus on these cause and effect events that went throughout this period. It really started with Manifest Destiny. I mean, if you want to get really technical, you can go back to, 1803 and the Louisiana Purchase and that expansion right there. So expansion is going to lead to all of these problems because we have different ideologies in the North, different ideologies in the South, and they're going to come, smack right into each other in this time period. So that's what I want you to focus on as we get ready for this test tomorrow. Other than that, I think honestly, this is probably one of the most straightforward units in APUSH. If you could just follow the timeline, I think you have a good understanding of everything that went on. So, does anybody have any questions? No one's popping any questions in there. So if you don't have any questions, this might be a short evening. I did it in an hour, and that's even with all the technical difficulties. So, all right. Flynn is here. Let's see if we can get Flynn to pop up. You want to get up here? Want to come say hello? Come here. Hey. Come here. You want to get up? Come here. Oh, come say hello while we're waiting for questions. Get up here. Get up here. Come on. Up. Maybe I'll just put this down. If I point this down, I can't point it down low enough. It used to be a lot easier when I did this on my laptop. Get up here. Come here. There we go. Here he is. All right. Here's Flynn. Yeah, Flynn just turned 11 years old a few weeks ago. So anyway, birthday boy. Say I'm the birthday boy. All right, guys. So that's going to do it. That's going to be, there we go. That's going to be our review for time period 5. Hopefully this helps you out. Otherwise, we were going to see you tomorrow to take care of our tests. I'm going to take this boy out and we're going to play a little. Yeah, we're going to go play a little. All right, guys. Have a fantastic evening. We will see you later. Good night.